Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Hasina Damayanti, and today we will be exploring cultural studies, a critical approach to literature and society, based on a handbook of critical approaches to literature. Let's start with a foundational definition. What is cultural studies? Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field that examines how culture creates and reflects meaning, power, identity, and social relationships. Historically, literary studies focused almost exclusively on traditional texts, like novels, poetry, and plays. Cultural studies breaks those boundaries. It argues that literature cannot be separated from other cultural products. Therefore, it expands its scope to study film and television, music and media, fashion and popular culture, and even the practice of our everyday lives. Everything around us is a text waiting to be analyzed. To understand this field, we have to look at where it came from. Cultural studies emerged during the intense social and political movements of the 1960s, a time when traditional institutional authority was heavily questioned. Because it is interdisciplinary, it does not rely on just one theory. Instead, it draws ideas from a vast web of disciplines, including Marxism, post-structuralism, postmodernism, feminism, sociology, anthropology, race and ethnic studies, and the last one is postcolonial studies. This theoretical diversity gives us a multi-layered lens to critique society. There are four main characteristics that define the cultural studies approach. First is boundary crossing, meaning it deliberately dissolves strict academic disciplines. Second is politically engaged. It is not just an abstract intellectual exercise, but it actively challenges social inequalities. Third is power-focused. It examines the deep relationship between culture and power. And the last one is inclusive. It completely rejects the old elitist distinction between high art like classic literature and everyday popular culture, treating them both as equally worthy of serious analysis. Then we got four main goals of cultural studies. The first is the interdisciplinary analysis. By merging different fields to evaluate cultural phenomena. The second is political engagement, questioning systems of power and privilege. Third is rejects cultural hierarchies. In this lens, a prestige literary novel, a blockbuster movie, a television show, or even a social media trend are all treated as equally important texts. Last is studies cultural production, investigating not just the final product, but also the process of how these products are manufactured, distributed, sold, and ultimately consumed by the public. Now let's explore some of the major branches within the field, starting with British cultural materialism, which focused on ideology and hegemony. Key thinkers here include Raymond Williams, Antonio Gramsci, and Lewis Althusser. The core idea here is that culture does not exist in a vacuum. It is actively shaped by ideology. Power operates quietly through cultural institutions like schools, media, and religion. Through these institutions, a dominant group establishes hegemony, which subtly influences how everyday people perceive a reality, making unequal power structures seem natural and unquestionable. Next, we have New Historicism, a branch heavily associated with the scholar Stephen Greenblatt. Its golden motto fit perfectly to the approach. The text is historical and history is textual. What this means is that literature and history are fundamentally interconnected. We cannot fully understand a literary work without placing it within its specific historical context. At the same time, new historicists remind us that our knowledge of history comes from historical documents and cultural artifacts, which themselves must be critically read and interpreted as subjective texts. As the field expanded, American multiculturalism emerged to place the absolute importance of diverse cultural narratives at the center of society. This branch emphasized the absolute importance of diverse cultural narratives in society. And this branch raised some really important questions, such as which cultures should be included in literary studies, who decides what is considered important literature, and how do race and ethnicity shape identity. This framework opens the door to voices that were historically marginalized. Under the umbrella of multiculturalism, African American literature serves as a vital area of study, focusing deeply on identity and resistance. Major themes include racial identity, resistance against systemic oppression, double consciousness, and oral traditions. This rich literary tradition is defined by groundbreaking writers such as Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, Toni Morrison, and Zara Neale Hurston, whose works use narrative to reclaim agency and critique structural injustice. Similarly, we got Latina or Latino literature that provides essential insights into themes of borders and hybridity. It explores the physical, psychological, and linguistic journeys of immigration, as well as the concept of border identity, living between cultures. Writers in this space frequently use code switching, blending English with Spanish to reflect their lived realities and celebrate cultural hybridity. Key figures include Sandra Cisneros, Gloria Anzaldúa, Rodolfo Anaya, and Richard Rodriguez, who map out what it means to belong to multiple worlds at once. Then, when we look at Native American literature, the focus shifts heavily towards heritage, memory, and preservation. This literary tradition is characterized by a profound reliance on oral storytelling, a deep connection to tribal identity and the land, and the active preservation of sacred heritage. Crucially, it serves as a powerful mode of active resistance against historical cultural erasure. Masterpieces by authors like N. Scott Momaday, Louis Erdrich, and Joy Harjo, they demonstrate how storytelling keeps a culture alive, sovereign, and resilient. Completing our look at multicultural narratives, we got Asian American literature. This literature centers on themes of belonging and representation. Writers frequently negotiate the complex spaces of immigration experience, generational cultural conflicts between immigrant parents and American-born children, and the necessity of confronting and dismantling harmful cultural stereotypes. Authors like Maxine Hong Kingston, Amy Tan, and Jade Snow Wong have been instrumental in charting these diverse narratives of identity and self-definition. Moving into broader cultural shift, we encounter postmodernism, an intellectual movement that completely embraces fragmentation. Postmodernism is deeply skeptical of absolute truths and fiercely rejects the grandmaster narratives, which refers to the overarching stories societies tell themselves to justify progress or absolute order. Instead, it celebrates cultural diversity, irony, and instability. Key thinkers like Jean-Francois Lyotard, Jane Baudrillard, and Frederick Jameson argue that a media-saturated world, reality itself becomes fragmented, and our culture reflects this lack of a single, fixed center. This brings us directly to the analysis of popular culture, which, if we look closely at the everyday things around us, its scope is vast, analyzing television, film, advertising, music, comic books, and social media. To decode popular culture, scholars use four distinct methods. The first one is production analysis, which look at how a media text is made and funded. Second is textual analysis, examining the symbols and hidden meaning within the content. Third is audience analysis, observing how everyday people interpret and use media, and then historical analysis, placing the pop culture phenomenon in its specific time period. Next, another vital dimension is post-colonial studies, which examines the lingering cultural, political, and psychological effects of colonialism and empire long after colonies gained independence. It tackles critical issues such as the identity crisis of post-colonial subjects, the Eurocentric representation of marginalized people as the other, ongoing cultural domination, and the concept of hybridity. Thinkers like Edward Said, Frantz Fanon, Homi K. Bhabha, and Gayatri Spivak revolutionized how we read literature by exposing how deeply colonial power dynamics embedded themselves in global culture. To navigate cultural studies successfully, we need a specific vocabulary of critique. Let's define four essential terms. First is hegemony. It refers to dominance maintained not through physical force, but through culture and ideology. Second, discourse. It represents the structured ways of thinking and speaking that define and limit power in society. Third, hybridity. Hybridity is the blending of distinct cultures often emerging from colonial histories. And fourth, representation. It's the active practice of how people, spaces, and cultures are portrayed and constructed through language and media. So, why does all of this matter? Why is cultural studies important? Cultural studies is crucial because it provides us with practical critical tools. It helps us understand deep-seated power relationships, analyze media with a critical and skeptical eye, and genuinely appreciate cultural diversity. Furthermore, it empowers us to challenge harmful social stereotypes and enable us to interpret literature not as an isolated text on a page, but as a living document deeply rooted within its social and political context. To conclude, culture is never neutral. It is a site of power, reflection of social values, and an indispensable tool for understanding human identity. Cultural studies encourage continuous critical thinking about how meaning is created, represented, and contested in our everyday lives. I will leave you with these final thoughts. Culture is not just what we read or watch. It is how we understand the world around us. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.